War rewards bold commanders. 8 of history's most decorated generals discovered that boldness, left unchecked by caution, does not just lose battles, it erases armies. Between them, they buried, starved, froze, and surrendered more than 1 million soldiers. Men who trusted a single decision at the top and paid for it at the bottom. Every empire remembers its victories. Fewer remember the valley in China where 400,000 men were buried alive, or the desert crossing where 50,000 simply vanished. These are the 8 who made sure history would remember the other kind of day. Ancient China, 260 BCE. The state of Zhao held a strong defensive line against the invading army of Qin at Changping, commanded for nearly 3 years by the cautious general Lian Po, who refused every attempt to bait him into open battle. Zhao Kuo replaced him. He had studied his father's military writings extensively and could recite troop formations from memory, but he had never once commanded men in real combat. Qin spies spread a rumor through Zhao territory that Zhao Kuo was the only general their army truly feared. The king of Zhao believed it, and so did Zhao Kuo. He abandoned Lian Po's fortified position and marched his 45,000 men into open ground, where Qin General Bai Qi allowed the advance, then quietly sealed both ends of the valley behind him. For 46 days, the trapped army starved. Soldiers killed and ate their own dead before Zhao Kuo was shot down, attempting a final breakout. Bai Qi ordered the surviving 400,000 men buried alive, sparing 240 of the youngest boys, to walk home and describe what they had seen. He had read every book written on war. He had simply never fought one. Rome, 53 BCE. Marcus Licinius Crassus was already the wealthiest man in the Republic, but wealth was not the same as glory, and Pompey and Caesar both had it in greater supply. Crassus wanted a war of his own, so he launched an unprovoked invasion of the Parthian Empire with 7 legions, roughly 40,000 men, crossing the Euphrates without local guides or cavalry support worth mentioning. At Carrhae, Parthian horse archers under General Serena circled the Roman formation for hours, firing continuously into men who had already run out of water and, eventually, shields. When Roman officers begged for permission to break formation and charge, Crassus ordered them to hold. More than 20,000 Roman soldiers died standing in place, waiting for orders that never changed. Crassus himself died during a supposed peace negotiation that Parthian commanders had arranged specifically to kill him. According to Roman writers, his captors poured molten gold down his throat afterward, a pointed joke about the greed that started the war in the first place. Rome's richest man had, in the end, financed his own execution. Germania, 9 CE. Governor Publius Quinctilius Varus commanded 3 of Rome's most experienced legions, roughly 20,000 men, marching through territory he believed was fully pacified. His trusted advisor on local affairs was a Germanic nobleman named Arminius, who had spent years quietly organizing the very tribes Varus assumed were loyal subjects of Rome. Arminius led the Roman column into the Teutoburg Forest, a narrow, waterlogged corridor between steep hills, where his warriors had already prepared the ground. For 3 consecutive days, Germanic fighters attacked the stretched-out Roman line from the trees. Roman heavy infantry, trained and equipped for open field combat, could not form ranks between the trunks, and the legions were destroyed almost to the last soldier. Varus fell on his own sword rather than be taken alive. Emperor Augustus reportedly went months without cutting his hair, striking his head against doorframes and shouting Varus's name into empty rooms. Rome never attempted to conquer the territory east of the Rhine again, and the 3 legion numbers lost that day. The 17th, 18th, and 19th were retired permanently. No Roman unit would ever carry those numbers again. Sweden, 1708. King Charles XII had already crushed larger Russian armies twice in earlier campaigns and had stopped taking Tsar Peter's forces seriously as a threat. Confident in his own reputation, he marched deep into Ukraine during one of the coldest winters recorded in European history at the time. Supply lines froze solid. Food ran out weeks before any major engagement, and roughly 1/3 of the Swedish army died from exposure before a single decisive battle was fought. By the time Charles reached Poltava in the summer of 1709, he had already been wounded in the foot and had to be carried into the field on a stretcher, unable to direct his own troops in real time. His exhausted force of about 17,000 men faced a Russian army nearly double that size, fully rested and well supplied. The Swedish line collapsed within hours. Charles fled south into Ottoman territory, where he remained in exile for 5 years, while the empire he left behind lost its army, its momentum, and its position as the dominant power in the Baltic. Overconfidence had frozen to death outside Poltava long before the battle even started. France, 1812. Napoleon Bonaparte assembled the largest invasion force Europe had ever seen, roughly 600,000 men, to force Tsar Alexander back into a trade alliance the Russians had already abandoned. The Russian army refused every offer of a decisive battle and simply retreated, burning crops, villages, and bridges for hundreds of miles as it withdrew deeper into the country. Napoleon reached an empty, burning Moscow in September. He waited 5 weeks inside the ruined city for a surrender that never arrived, then began the retreat in October, directly into the onset of the Russian winter. Temperatures dropped to -40. Horses died faster than they could be replaced, wagons froze into the mud, and Cossack cavalry picked off stragglers along a single narrow road stretching back toward Poland. Fewer than 100,000 men returned to French territory in fighting condition. Napoleon had planned for a swift campaign season. Instead, he had scheduled the slow collapse of his own empire. Montana Territory, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer located a large encampment of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors along the Little Bighorn River. Rather than wait 2 days for reinforcements already en route, he split his 7th Cavalry into 3 separate columns and attacked immediately, worried the camp might scatter before he could engage it. His own scouts warned him. The encampment held far more fighters than Army intelligence had estimated, somewhere between 1,800 and 2,500 warriors. Custer dismissed the warning and pushed forward with roughly 210 men, directly into the largest concentration of Plains warriors ever assembled on the continent. Warriors led by Crazy Horse and Chief Gall surrounded the detachment on an exposed ridge within the hour. Every soldier in Custer's immediate command was killed before reinforcements arrived. The general who had built an entire public career on aggressive cavalry charges had, for the first time, no army left to charge with. Persia, 525 BCE. King Cambyses II had just conquered Egypt when he sent an army of roughly 50,000 soldiers across the Sahara to destroy the oracle at the Siwa oasis, which had reportedly refused to legitimize his rule over the newly conquered territory. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the army marched roughly 7 days into the desert before a violent sandstorm buried the entire force beneath the dunes. No confirmed remains, equipment, or archaeological trace of that army have ever been found, despite repeated expeditions across the past century searching the same stretch of desert. Some modern historians question whether the disappearance was exaggerated or invented entirely to explain a defeat too embarrassing for Persian record keepers to admit honestly. Either explanation leads to the same result. An army sent to punish disrespect toward the gods vanished as though the desert itself had taken the insult personally. The Soviet Union, 1942. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus led the German 6th Army into Stalingrad, expecting a quick urban conquest. Instead, his force became locked into house-by-house fighting that consumed months rather than weeks, bleeding manpower into a city neither side could fully hold. In November, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, encircling the entire 6th Army, roughly 250,000 men, inside the ruined city. Hitler refused permission for any breakout attempt and promised an air resupply that never arrived in sufficient quantity, ordering Paulus instead to fight to the last bullet. Temperatures fell below -30. Rations dropped to near starvation levels, and frostbite claimed nearly as many soldiers as Soviet gunfire did. Paulus surrendered on January 31, 1943, becoming the first German field marshal ever captured in the war. Of the roughly 91,000 men taken prisoner alongside him, fewer than 6,000 ever saw Germany again. Hitler had promoted him to field marshal the day before, specifically because, by German military tradition, no field marshal had ever surrendered alive. Paulus surrendered anyway. 8 commanders, 23 centuries apart, spread across 4 continents. The overconfidence looked different every time. Arrogance, pride, superstition, ambition, but the arithmetic never changed. An army is only ever as strong as the judgment of the man giving the orders, and history rarely forgives the ones who forgot that. The soldiers paid the bill either way.